Joining us for the latest on those prisoners that are being returned to the West Bank. We are going to turn to our studio guests right now because we seem to be having some communication issues with our correspondent in Jerusalem. So to continue this, we'll weigh in. We're going to bring in retired Army veteran Lieutenant Colonel Darren Gorb, and alongside him we have former member of Israeli Parliament, Erel Margalit. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Good morning.
Michael, why don't you take it away?
Sure. All right, Colonel, let me just start with you quickly. Do you think these prisoners will now attempt to join Hamas or commit more attacks against the Israelis now that they're, technically free?
Yeah, Michael, I think there's a decent chance you're going to see some of these people again. A lot of the prisoners that have been released, though, from what I'm hearing, are also women and children. So who's to say? But Hamas is not afraid of using either one of those two as terrorist entities in the first place. So I'd anticipate it by the time this is all said and done that some of these faces are going to be very familiar.
Erel, the Qatari delegation arrived in Israel today, which is incredibly rare to have Qataris land a private jet in Israel. Why did they come there for these negotiations? We know that they're part of the hostage negotiations. What was the reason to have them land in Israel instead of going to Egypt?
Well, as you remember, there are two major goals for this campaign and retaliation that Israel has. One is to uproot Hamas, and that's something that people need to understand, because there was no way that Hamas would have given hostages back if there wasn't a very strong pressures from people from my unit, other units, infantry, Air Force, the tank units, going from houses to houses, from tunnel to tunnel, and finding out that underneath the schools, underneath the hospitals, underneath the mosques, there's a actual 2.5 billion were put just in the last year in order to build this infrastructure. But doing that, remember, Israel has two goals. One is to uproot Hamas, and the other is to bring the hostages, the kids. You're seeing these kids, unbelievable. Who would take these kids?
I know, it's
women, 85-year-old women that were, in the Holocaust, taking them. So bringing them home, Israel has a moral commitment to do so for the civilians. So in that process, Qatar and the Egyptians are very much involved, and also the UAE and Saudi Arabia in the background. And that brings me to a point where if we're going to have anybody involved in reconstructing Gaza in any way, in the way that Israel would find it acceptable, it needs to be the moderate Arab states that are standing there in order to take charge of the reconstruction and the security.
Just to follow up on that, though, do we really consider Qatar a moderate Arab state? And they are strong allies of Hamas too. So is that a threat to Israel, having them involved here, and especially having a delegation there on the ground?
It is. The head of the Mossad has been spending time in Qatar. People were there, and it's a tricky situation, right? The U.S. has been using Qatar in order to deal in the back doors with the Taliban and with Iran, because that's the strategy of Qatar. They have it both ways. And it's a big dilemma for Israel as well, because they've been funding Hamas on one hand, but on the other hand, they and through the Egyptians and even directly have direct access to Sinwar. So when you're dealing with a hostage situation, when you're dealing with people who are really bad guys, you need to take any channel that you can. And this is one thing that Israel's doing, but with a clear eye on uprooting Hamas from the area, the clear eye on trying to bring a Palestinian and an international administration that can help build Gaza for the citizens and not build Gaza as a base for terror for the next 10 or 20 years.
Yeah, Colonel, we have just 30 seconds left. Why don't you give us just, your take on that in 30 seconds?
I think what stuck out to me the most was he's exactly right, that Israel is the one who will provide the best answer for what happens in Gaza, and they can work with other Arab states in the region that are willing to work with them. But in the end, United Nations and all these agencies that have already failed in Gaza and helped create a terrorist base camp throughout that region need to step aside and let Israel lead this effort.
All right, Colonel Darren Gorb and Erel Margalit, thank you both so much for joining us today. Thanks for coming in studio.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, all right, thank you.